Before sunrise, 600 men were alive, dreaming of home, thinking about their families, believing they would see another day, but by noon they were gone. One decision, one moment of hesitation, one leader who didn't react fast enough, and history recorded it as America's darkest defeat. But buried inside that tragedy is a lesson that you must understand before life destroys your opportunity the same way. He stood at the edge of the battlefield before dawn, the chill biting through his uniform, the weight of what was to come pressing down on him with an almost physical force. The men around him were talking in low voices, adjusting their gear, laughing nervously at jokes meant to mask the fear that all of them carried in their hearts. He looked at each one of them, tried to memorize their faces, the sharp lines of determination etched across their features, the flicker of hope in their eyes. He knew that by the time the sun fully rose, some of them might not live to see it again. The thought clawed at his stomach, a gnawing, relentless reminder that leadership is a burden heavier than any uniform or medal. 600 men were under his command, 600 lives resting on decisions he would make in the next few moments. Decisions that could mean the difference between survival and a tragedy that would echo through history. The first light began to spread across the horizon, painting the field in a pale, deceptive calm. He could hear birds chirping in the distance, a sound so ordinary and peaceful that it made the approaching violence feel surreal, like stepping into a nightmare that had been paused for too long. Orders were shouted, drums rolled in the distance, and the first movement began. A slow, methodical advance into a place that would soon be transformed into hell itself. Every step they took was a march toward uncertainty, a test of courage, and yet he could feel the tension building in every soldier beside him, the invisible threads of fear woven tightly into their bodies, making their muscles tense, their hearts pound faster. And then it began. The first shot rang out, cutting through the silence like a blade. It was followed by another and another, until the air seemed to shatter with the sound of gunfire and the roar of cannons. Men screamed, and the cries were almost too many to count, rising in a chaotic symphony that tore at the edges of his mind. 600 men he had trained, men who trusted him with their lives, were falling around him, their bodies struck down before they could even truly fight. The earth trembled with the violence, dust and debris kicked into the sky, obscuring vision, turning the morning light into a dim, gray haze. He moved among them, shouting commands through the smoke, trying to bring order to chaos, but each voice he raised seemed to vanish into the storm of destruction. He saw friends he had grown to respect and love cut down, men who had stood beside him through countless drills and exercises, who had shared laughter and fears during long nights in camp. Their lives were taken in an instant, and he felt a weight in his chest that threatened to crush him, a grief so sharp it made his hands shake and his knees weak. He realized in that moment that leadership is not about glory or recognition. It is about carrying the pain of others, about standing firm when the world is tearing itself apart around you, about making impossible decisions with no promise of safety or success. Each fallen soldier was a piece of his heart ripped away, and yet he could not stop, could not falter, because to hesitate was to invite even more tragedy. The enemy advanced with relentless precision, their own fire organized and merciless. Every maneuver he tried to execute, every plan he had imagined to protect his men, seemed inadequate against the sheer force of what they faced. The ground itself seemed to conspire against them, uneven and treacherous, turning a battle of skill into a struggle for sheer survival. He could hear the screams of wounded men, the desperate calls for aid, the sound of equipment falling, metal clashing against metal. It was a noise that would haunt him for the rest of his life, a soundtrack of loss and despair that played over and over in his mind long after the guns fell silent. He ran through the chaos, moving from group to group, offering orders, encouragement, and solace where he could, though he knew that it would not be enough. There was no way to save all of them, no way to rewrite the morning, no way to bring back the 600 lives extinguished before the battle had even truly begun. He felt rage, a raw, burning anger at the unfairness of it all, at the cruelty of a world where courage and loyalty could be met with annihilation so swiftly, so mercilessly. And yet he also felt a determination that burned just as brightly, a refusal to allow their deaths to be meaningless, a need to honor their sacrifice through continued struggle, through sheer force of will. The sky was filled with smoke and the acrid scent of gunpowder, stinging eyes and lungs, creating a haze that made it impossible to see clearly, impossible to discern friend from foe. Yet even in the confusion, he noticed acts of courage that would never make it into history books, men throwing themselves into danger to save comrades, refusing to yield even as everything collapsed around them. Each act was a testament to the human spirit, to bravery born not of hope for glory, but of loyalty, love, and an unshakable sense of duty. It reminded him that even in the darkest moments, there are sparks of light, moments of heroism that define the essence of humanity. He saw the dead and the dying, the ones who would never laugh again, never speak again, never feel the warmth of the sun on their faces. Their absence left a silence that was deafening, a void in the heart of the battlefield that no strategy could fill. And yet, in the midst of it all, he kept moving, kept commanding, kept fighting, not for victory, because victory seemed impossible, but for survival, for memory, for the honor of those who had given everything in a single morning. Each decision was a knife edge, each command a balance between life and death, each glance at the horizon a confrontation with mortality itself. The sun climbed higher, exposing the devastation in full clarity. He could see the bodies strewn across the field, the blood mixing with dirt, the evidence of how quickly hope can turn into horror, and still he did not stop. The men who remained looked to him, some with fear, some with trust, some with questions they could not voice. He understood their eyes without them speaking, the silent pleas for guidance, for leadership, for reassurance in a moment where nothing could be certain. His heart pounded, his mind raced, and yet he moved with the precision of experience, making choices that were almost instinctive, born of a lifetime of preparation for a morning that no one could have truly foreseen. Time seemed to stretch and contract simultaneously. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days, yet each moment was filled with intense clarity. He noticed every detail, every movement, every expression. He felt every fall, every cry, every heartbeat in the field as if it were his own. Leadership is not about distance in these moments. It is about total immersion, about feeling the pain, fear, and courage of every man under your command as if it were yours alone. Smoke and chaos covered the battlefield, yet he found brief moments of clarity, flashes of strategy, glimpses of opportunity. He maneuvered, repositioned, shouted, and inspired, not because he believed they would succeed in the conventional sense, but because action was a weapon against despair, because every choice, every movement, was a refusal to let death dominate the field entirely. He witnessed acts of valor that would never be recorded, sacrifices that would never be celebrated, and he carried each in his memory as a sacred weight. By the time the sun reached its peak, the reality of the morning had settled fully upon him. 600 men lost, a nation shaken, a commander marked forever by the magnitude of the catastrophe. Yet he understood that leadership is defined not by the absence of failure, but by the presence of relentless commitment in the face of it. To survive, to endure, to guide those who remained, he had to push through the grief, the anger, and the guilt, moving forward even when every instinct screamed to collapse. The field was quiet now, but the silence was not peace. It was the echo of devastation, a weight that pressed down on him. With every breath, he walked among the remnants of what had been a proud regiment, his boots sinking into mud stained with blood, his eyes scanning for faces he had hoped to see, only to find absence. Every fallen soldier was a story cut short, a promise broken, a future extinguished before it had a chance to shine. He could feel the emptiness pressing against his chest, a relentless reminder that in war the cost is always higher than any victory can ever repay. He gathered the men who remained, their numbers already diminished, their morale shattered, their eyes hollow from witnessing the horrors that had unfolded in mere hours. They looked to him, searching for answers, for courage, for some flicker of hope in the ruin. He realized in that moment that leadership was no longer about strategy or tactics. It was about presence, about carrying the weight of their fear and grief, and turning it into a reason to survive. Every word he spoke had to carry strength, even when his own heart was breaking, even when the memories of the 600 haunted him with relentless clarity. Orders had to be given, supplies accounted for, wounded tended to, positions reassessed. He moved methodically, almost mechanically, through the tasks, aware that every decision could mean life or death for the men still standing. The enemy was still out there, relentless, calculating, a constant reminder that retreat was not an escape from danger but a continuation of it. Each step he took was measured, each command deliberate, because in these moments precision was a weapon as vital as courage. He could not allow despair to spread. It was contagious and far deadlier than the bullets that had already taken so many. He looked at the battlefield, at the ruined terrain, and felt the crushing weight of responsibility. He had underestimated the enemy, misjudged the conditions, and paid the price in lives he could not bring back. That morning had taught him that even preparation, even skill, even loyalty and bravery could not shield men from the chaos of war. The lesson was bitter and sharp, cutting deeper than any wound he had ever suffered. And yet, within that bitter lesson, there was clarity. Survival demanded adaptation, focus, and an unflinching commitment to the men who still depended on him. He went from soldier to soldier, checking wounds, offering water, offering words, offering reassurance where he could. Some were too injured to respond, eyes glazed with shock or pain, their hands trembling, their bodies stricken with exhaustion. Others looked at him with unspoken questions, as if their gaze alone could demand an explanation for the morning's carnage. He had none. There were no words that could capture the horror, the suddenness, the sheer scale of loss. All he could offer was presence, steady hands, a voice that refused to tremble, and the promise that he would continue to lead them, even as the ghosts of the fallen haunted every step. The enemy pressed forward, and with each passing hour, the need for action became urgent. He studied the terrain, assessed the weaknesses, and began to reorganize what was left of his forces. He understood that the men were not only physically weakened but emotionally fractured, and that leadership in this moment required more than strategy. It required empathy, resilience, and the ability to inspire courage through sheer example. He moved with authority, but not without compassion, recognizing that every instruction carried weight and that every failure to act decisively could invite further tragedy. As he repositioned his men, he thought of those lost, the 600 whose absence left an invisible void that would never be filled. Their sacrifice was written in the mud, in the blood, in the silence of the field. He thought of the families waiting at home, unaware of the scale of devastation, and felt the sting of guilt, knowing that his decisions had shaped the course of their lives in ways he could never undo. And yet, amidst the grief, he found resolve, a determination to honor their memory through action, to turn catastrophe into a lesson, to ensure that their deaths were not in vain. Every movement he made was precise, calculated, yet infused with urgency. He could hear distant cannon fire, the crackle of musket volleys, and he knew that danger was far from over. Survival required vigilance, courage, and a relentless will to persevere. He inspired his men not with grand speeches, but with actions, directing reinforcements, organizing defensive positions, treating the wounded with calm efficiency, moving as if driven by instinct and duty combined. His presence became an anchor in the storm, a focal point for those whose courage faltered, a symbol that even in the aftermath of disaster, leadership endures. The men began to respond, slowly regaining composure, finding strength in the order he instilled. They looked to him for guidance, for strategy, for reassurance that they could endure another hour, another day. He could see the fear in their eyes, but also the spark of determination, a reminder that courage is forged not in the absence of fear, but in its face. He reminded them through his actions that even after the most devastating loss, they still had a purpose, still had a role to play, still had the ability to survive against odds that seemed insurmountable. He assessed the wounded and the dead, making decisions about who could continue, who needed immediate care, who must be carried or left behind. Every choice was agonizing but necessary. He moved methodically, as if operating with a clarity born of desperation, understanding that indecision was the enemy's ally. The weight of every decision pressed upon him, yet he bore it with grim resolve, knowing that the men were relying on him to channel their fear into action, their grief into endurance, their shock into strategy. The battlefield had become a crucible, shaping not only the course of the conflict, but the character of every man who survived it. He could see in their eyes the transformation that hardship brings, the way courage is tempered in fire, the way leadership is defined not by victory, but by the will to continue when the world seems determined to crush you. He understood that their survival would depend on both physical strength and mental fortitude, on the ability to endure, to act, to hold together as a unit even as the weight of loss threatened to pull them apart. Hours passed, each filled with tension, each marked by the constant threat of the enemy's return, the uncertainty of what lay beyond the horizon, the burden of maintaining order amidst chaos. He felt the exhaustion pressing on him, yet he refused to slow, refused to falter. Every glance at a fallen comrade, every cry of the wounded, every flash of enemy fire renewed his determination. Leadership demanded relentless presence, a refusal to yield to despair, and a commitment to turning catastrophe into resilience. The sun had climbed higher now, casting harsh light on a battlefield that bore the scars of devastation, smoke still curling from shattered earth, and the cries of wounded echoing faintly across the morning. He stood at the edge, looking at the men who had survived, a fraction of the force he had brought into battle hours before. Each face was a canvas of exhaustion, fear, grief, and a tentative spark of determination. The weight of leadership pressed on him relentlessly, a burden that no rest could ease. He knew that survival alone was not enough. They had to endure, to regroup, to transform this disaster into a force capable of fighting another day. Every movement of the remaining soldiers was deliberate now, cautious, each step measured against the potential of hidden danger. He could see them flinch at shadows, hesitate at unexploded ordnance, recoil at distant gunfire. It was not weakness, it was the human response to trauma, the imprint of horror etched into muscle and mind. He moved among them, placing hands on shoulders, giving nods, whispering words that carried more than instruction. They carried the promise that he would not abandon them, that even after losing 600 men in one morning, they were not alone, and that he would lead them through the aftermath with the same relentless focus he had brought to the battle itself. The survivors formed small clusters, some tending to the injured, others holding their positions, scanning the horizon for threats. He assessed each group, making decisions with a precision born of necessity. He knew that every movement, every command, could decide who lived and who died next. He identified the leaders among the men, those who had not faltered, and empowered them to take charge, spreading responsibility so that the burden of leadership did not rest on his shoulders alone. It was a lesson learned painfully through loss. Even the strongest cannot carry all the weight alone, and survival depends on the courage and initiative of many. As he organized the remnants of his force, he thought of the fallen. 600 men, lives extinguished in hours, dreams unfulfilled, stories cut short. Their sacrifice weighed on him, not as a point of guilt alone, but as a source of motivation. A reminder that courage in the face of despair is the only thing that gives meaning to survival. He moved quickly, decisively, ensuring that the wounded were stabilized, that the dead were honored, that the enemy's position was noted and the terrain understood. Every detail mattered, every decision rippled outward with consequences he could not ignore. The morning had been a crucible, and now, in the aftermath, he had to transform the lessons of pain into the strength of action. He could hear distant gunfire, the enemy still probing, still testing, still ready to exploit weakness. There was no time for mourning beyond brief pauses. The battlefield demanded attention, vigilance, and unflinching will. He trained his eyes on the horizon, imagining every possible movement of the opposition, calculating how to defend what remained, and how to use the surviving men to maintain some semblance of strength. He instructed them with clarity and authority, each word deliberate, each command purposeful, because hesitation could invite annihilation. Leadership in this hour required not only courage, but an acute understanding of human limits and the ability to transform fear into disciplined action. He noticed the subtle shifts in morale. Some men, despite the morning's carnage, were beginning to recover their composure. There was a fire in their eyes, hesitant but undeniable, the spark of resilience that emerges only when a soul refuses to surrender. He nurtured it, speaking briefly, demonstrating confidence through his own presence, showing them that even after the most devastating losses, a disciplined mind and a steady hand could shape survival, even hope. Each man he encouraged became a link in a chain of fortitude, and he realized that leadership was as much about cultivating courage as it was about issuing orders. He reflected on what had gone wrong, parsing through the decisions, the miscalculations, the assumptions that had led to the morning's disaster. But reflection had to be immediate, practical, and solution-oriented. There was no time for self-pity or lingering guilt. He began to strategize anew, reorganizing the force, establishing defensive positions, identifying potential retreats, and preparing contingencies. He instructed the men on new formations, adjusted their deployment, and drilled them with a calm urgency that belied the chaos they had endured. Every instruction was reinforced with reasoning. Every order explained so that understanding bred confidence, and confidence became a shield against despair. The survivors were ragged, weary, some limping, some nursing wounds, others simply shaken by what they had seen. Yet as he moved among them, he saw moments of humanity and courage. A soldier who had been frozen in shock now lifted his head, nodded at a command, and moved into position. Another, despite severe injury, carried supplies to comrades. Each act, however small, became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the indomitable nature of human spirit, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. He understood that survival depended not solely on strategy, but on the cohesion of the men, their ability to trust one another and act with purpose, even after the most unimaginable loss. He walked the line repeatedly, checking positions, observing reactions, ensuring that the survivors maintained discipline. There was no time for panic. They could not afford disarray. He made sure that every man knew his role, every position understood, every contingency accounted for. He had learned that in war, preparation in the aftermath of tragedy is the difference between survival and complete annihilation. And as he moved, he never stopped acknowledging the fallen, keeping their memory alive, so that the survivors would understand that their perseverance honored those who had been lost. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, shadows shifting across the battlefield, heat blending with smoke and the acrid scent of blood and gunpowder. He felt exhaustion clawing at him, muscles trembling, throat raw, mind stretched to the limits. Yet he could not stop. Every pause threatened chaos. Every hesitation risked disaster. He drew strength from the determination of those who remained, from the resilience that shone in their eyes, and from the understanding that leadership is defined not by comfort or ease, but by the capacity to endure and inspire endurance in others. He orchestrated rotations, allowing some men brief respite while others maintained watch, understanding that survival required management of not just bodies but morale. He reinforced defenses, anticipating enemy movement, and made sure that every survivor understood that while the morning had taken so much, it had not taken their ability to fight, to defend, to endure. Each small victory, each successful repositioning, each act of initiative became a stepping stone, transforming a force in ruin into a force that could still act with purpose. In the midst of this, he contemplated the broader meaning of the catastrophe, realizing that leadership in the aftermath of loss is about shaping the narrative of survival, instilling courage where despair threatens to dominate, and fostering unity where fragmentation could destroy everything. The survivors began to act with cohesion, their actions synchronized through trust and shared determination. The 600 men lost that morning became more than numbers. They became the measure of resolve, the silent witnesses to the courage that the living now carried forward. He observed how even in the face of immense grief, human beings could adapt, recover, and act decisively. He encouraged initiative, praised small acts of courage, and reminded them through example that resilience is not an abstract concept. It is lived, practiced, and embodied in every movement, every decision, every breath. The survivors became a testament to the possibility of hope even after unimaginable loss, a living proof that leadership forged in fire can transform despair into determination and tragedy into enduring strength. And in the quiet that followed, when the smoke cleared and the echoes of gunfire faded into memory, he understood a truth that no victory parade could ever teach. That courage is not measured by the battles you win, but by the strength to stand again after unimaginable loss. The 600 men lost that morning were not forgotten. They lived in every decision, every breath, every act of endurance by those who survived. History does not remember the easy triumphs. It remembers the moments when darkness fell and men rose anyway. He looked at the field, scarred and silent, and knew that defeat could not define them. The measure of a leader, of a nation, of a soldier, is not in the ease of their victories, but in their ability to carry hope through the ashes of despair, to transform tragedy into resolve, and to honor the fallen not with words, but with unwavering action. Every life lost was a reminder that the cost of freedom is steep, that bravery demands sacrifice, and that the spirit of those who fought cannot be broken, no matter how great the darkness. In that moment he made a vow, not only to the men who had fallen, but to every soul who would follow in their footsteps, that their loss would fuel resilience, that their courage would be remembered in every step forward, and that even in the bleakest dawn the human spirit could rise unshaken. Unbroken, unstoppable, the battlefield had taken much, but it could not take their will, it could not take their honor, and it could not take the legacy of courage that would live forever in the hearts of those who survived to carry the story forward.